Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, crack a beer and come near. It is the Fantasy Football Hustle powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your host, Brian Drake. You can check me out Sundays, 7 to 9 Eastern, as I host PFF Postgame on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. I'm also over on the Twitter machine at Drake Fantasy. The show is at FF Hustle on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. One of these days, folks, we're going to surprise you and put out our first TikTok. No, we're not. I'm just kidding. But anyways, we got a fun one for you tonight. We're welcoming in our pal, Nic Bodiford. And Nick works for a host of sites out there across the web, including Pro Football Focus, when you can hear him doing some work with our pal, Ian Hartitz, on a podcast. And, we'll let Nick tell everybody all about that. We want you to follow him on Twitter at Nic Bodiford NFL. And today on the show, we want to take a look at the fantasy playoffs, the roadmap on how to get there. And once we do, who are the landmines we need to avoid? Because trade deadlines in fantasy leagues will be here before you know it. I believe in Yahoo, it's like 3 weeks away. We're already entering week 8, folks. So you need to get your ducks in a row because there's a lot of bye weeks still to play. In week 14, the week before the fantasy playoffs begin, there are 6 teams on bye. We'll talk about all of that, players to sell, players to trade for. But let's welcome Nick in. Nick, welcome to the Hustle, my friend.
Thank you. This is a big honor to be here. I'm a huge fan of the show. I'm a big fan of you, Drake. And I hope to rise to the occasion.
So tell me about this pod you do with Ian, because you work on a show with him, once a week. Where can people listen to that?
Yeah, so that's just on the main PFF Fantasy Football podcast feed, and we cover injuries, and actually recently we've added a DFS segment. So when we do that, we'll go through every team's injury report, and then after we have that all covered, I'll break down my 2 articles, which are the wide receiver cornerback matchups and the DFS cheat sheet. You can find my rankings at Nerdball Fantasy Football. You can find weekly recaps at the 33rd Team. And then I do streaming and starts and sits at 4for4.
Look at you. What a busy guy. I can't get anyone to pay me to write for him. You've got 58 people. It's unbelievable. So, folks, this should be pretty fun here. And if you're into fantasy and you're into thinking ahead, this is the show for you. So I've got the PFF strength of schedule tool pulled up also. And if you have a subscription at PFF, you can use this to your advantage. And if you need to save a few bucks on that subscription, use promo code HUSTLE. Why not? We'll save you 25% off any PFF sub. Again, promo code HUSTLE. So, all right, we talked about bye weeks, and there's no bye weeks week 12. Week 13, you've got Arizona and Carolina. And before the show, you and I were talking, Nick, about how important you feel those weeks 13 and 14 are, because those are the money weeks where you got to get W's. You got to get into the playoffs those weeks. You could be looking at week 14, the week you have to win. Last week of the regular season, Falcons, Bears, Packers, Colts, Saints, Commanders are all off.
Yeah, and so for that reason, those teams, we're going to suggest that you guys move on from players on those squads. I think the week I'm a little bit more nervous about is week 13, purely because there are only 2 teams on bye, which if you have an impact player on one of those 2 teams, you are at a significant disadvantage as compared to, you might have an opponent who's also working through a bye in week 14, but regardless, the goal here is to get you guys off of these players that might be a stick in your spokes in this crunch time window.
So those 2 teams, Arizona and Carolina, for weeks 13. So if we're looking at players maybe for that stretch run that we're trying to get rid of, Kyler Murray comes to mind for you. He's someone per PFF has he's ranked 17th in quarterback dropbacks for per fantasy points. He is 0.41 fantasy points per dropback. Again, that ranks 17th. looking at the PFF schedule for the playoffs, he has the third worst QB schedule. Plus, he's got that week 13 bye. There's a lot of red flags there, Nick.
Yeah. So I think that this week will provide potentially, hopefully, a sell high opportunity. The Arizona Cardinals are traveling to Minnesota. They've got a 49-point over under. I think you could either convince someone, hey, you want a part of this game, why don't I give you Kyler? Or afterwards, if he does have a good game, those Minnesota quarterbacks are not that great. You might be able to sell high then. Over the next 2 weeks, Arizona gets Seattle and the LA Rams. I think that there's high scoring potential there, but some potential trade targets. Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert are both on bye this week. If you can offer that team an elite quarterback like Kyler Murray and take Mahomes or Herbert off their hands to get them through the bye, they might be able to buy on that. There are a couple other guys here. Dak Prescott is on bye in week 9. Lamar Jackson is on bye in week 10. I think that any of these elite quarterbacks, and maybe I'm being generous with Dak, but I think any of these guys, if you can go to that fantasy manager and say, hey, I've got Kyler Murray that can be your, you don't have to worry about the upcoming bye. Give me your elite guy that's on bye. It might work. You might have to sweeten the deal a little bit, but those are the guys immediately who I would be looking to trade Kyler for.
That's a fantastic point. I know as a guy who has Justin Herbert in a few leagues, it's tough this week. You're hoping, Daniel Jones is available. You're seeing who's on the waiver wire. A Jimmy G could be out there. But if somebody dangles that carrot of, hey, here's Patrick Mahomes, you're like, oh, okay, well, we might be able to make this work. And then I don't have to downgrade, as the season goes on. How important is it to load your roster up with guys who have that bye behind them? I know in my home league where the trading is fast and furious, guys will always say at the deadline, yeah, but this guy still has a bye coming up. And that's a major, major sticking point in a lot of trades. That's why you look at guys on the Eagles and the Lions, some sort of high power offense, and the Bills, they're past their bye. It's like you want to kind of attack some of those guys.
Yeah, you might have to dress up Kyler for that reason, just because he has that bye looming, but it's still kind of far enough away that maybe folks won't be paying attention to it. The two fantasy managers who are going to be at a big advantage right now are the Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts managers who just got through their bye and now, probably have two of the top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL or in fantasy right now. And for those teams in particular, I might look to pick up Deshaun Watson if he's available. That would be, perhaps one of the only people on the waiver wire that might be able to replicate elite production. And since you don't have to plan for a bye, he could be a guy that you stash on your bench as a just in case.
Let me pull up here the quarterback strength of schedule for the playoffs, since we're talking quarterbacks right here. The guys at the top, it's not great. You don't want to start any of these folks really in the top 5. According to PFF, the 5 best playoff schedules, the Jets, you want nothing to do with Zach Wilson. Steelers, Colts, who are switching quarterbacks to Sam Ehlinger. God knows who will be quarterbacking the 4th team, Carolina, and then the Falcons. So you really don't want any of those guys. When you look down at the bottom, who's got it rough? Matt Stafford. I don't know how many contending teams are going to be playing Matthew Stafford. And then a couple interesting teams here in the bottom 5. You've got Geno Smith. The Seahawks are 31st. The Eagles come in at 29th. So there's 2 guys who are likely right now starting for fantasy teams. Does that bother you when you look at that strength of schedule for those 2 quarterbacks?
It wouldn't bother me for Jalen Hurts just because he can function in all environments. So I wouldn't be worried about him. Stafford, that does not make me feel good. And Cooper Kupp's probably fine, but hopefully they've re-signed Odell Beckham Jr. by then.
Yeah. Let's move over now to the running back position. And you've got a big name on your sell list, and it's New Orleans Saints running back Alvin Kamara, who has that looming week 14 bye. Now he's sort of coming on now. He's had a good game where managers could look and say, hey, Alvin Kamara, he's coming back. He's Alvin Kamara again. This is the guy I drafted in the 1st round. Why are you telling people to sell him?
So it's a combination of things, but the primary issue here is, primary issues are the bye, and then something that your good friend Drew Davenport has talked a lot about. The Saints are 2-5. Right now, it doesn't look like Kamara is going to be slapped with the suspension that we know is very likely to be coming from his Las Vegas altercation. The scenario that Drew cautioned us when drafting Kamara was, if they're really struggling, like let's say, they go out this week and they do some sort of Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton like switcheroo where they don't like what they're seeing. Anyway, they get down to 2-6. Suddenly this season is looking even more lost than it already is. And what Kamara's camp might do is take a plea deal. So now you have the two variables here are basically not just that Alvin Kamara might have a bad day, it's that he might not play both in the bye and for an extended period of time as he serves a suspension.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, make sure you're checking out our boy Drew Davenport. He's on here every other week on the Hustle with us. And it brings me to my sell for the running back position, and that's Aaron Jones. Looking at the PFF strength of schedule for the playoffs, the Packers rank 32nd, and we all know there's a lot of problems right now in Green Bay. Aaron Jones, though, is coming off a phenomenal week. So if you want to sell Aaron Jones, and I own Aaron Jones in a few in a few leagues, Aaron Jones was RB4 in PPR, scored 28 points for you. That was, though, based off of he scored 2 receiving touchdowns. On the ground, this team can't do anything. 8 carries for 23 yards this past week. That's not really getting it done. Some might say, Nick, hey, he's the guy that's going to turn things around for Green Bay. If they're going to pivot and become, the Green Bay team we expected, Aaron Jones is going to be the focal point. Well, you also then have to deal with that week 14 bye. And again, this is a team that right now kind of sucks. So if I can move Aaron Jones off the height of this big win, or not the big win, this big game, I think that could be a smart play. If you look at the fantasy playoffs, he's got the Rams, Dolphins, and Vikings those 3 weeks. So that's my big sell high right now. There's Aaron Jones.
Yeah. And so because of the questions around the Green Bay Packers offense, part of the issue here is Aaron Rodgers has a thumb injury, and in between every play, he's grabbing it and wincing in pain. We have the big scary stuff going on with Alvin Kamara. These two guys might be a little bit harder to sell than, a healthy player or someone who doesn't, well, I guess Cliff Kingsbury might be a question mark, but someone who doesn't have as many issues like Kyler Murray. So for this reason, what I've focused on here at the running back position for this crunch time window of week 13 and 14 are some running backs that might be already available right now. Samaje Perine, backup running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. They are facing the Cleveland Browns, who I believe are the 30th ranked defense in terms of running back fantasy points allowed in week 14. Chase Edmonds has been outplayed so far by Raheem Mostert, but we all know Mostert had, I think it was Pat Terrain mentioned this, he has cadaver cartilage in his knee that was it was like a quarter-sized piece that was replaced in his knee this offseason. He's, I think, 31 years old. Chase Edmonds gets to play against the Los Angeles Chargers in week 14. This is something that I talked about on the PFF show 2 weeks ago. I believe it's the Chargers are averaging the most yards allowed before contact in the NFL, so we like that. The Carolina backfield offers an interesting situation here. Chuba Hubbard clearly ran ahead of Donta Foreman in their most recent game. Unfortunately, Chuba suffered an ankle injury. Running backs tend, and I think it was an inversion ankle injury. So I called upon Adam Hutchison's injury index, which is a phenomenal resource. Running backs on average miss 1.7 games with an inversion ankle sprain. That's what Chuba Hubbard likely has. We got the report that he could have gone back and played in the same game, but oftentimes swelling becomes an issue. So what I'm kind of thinking is that Chuba Hubbard probably going to sit 1 to 2 games. And over the weekend, before he suffered the injury, this data comes from True Media via the 33rd team. Hubbard outsnapped Foreman overall on 3rd and 4th and long. Foreman did win the 2-minute drill battle, but then on a per touch efficiency basis, Chuba Hubbard basically blew Foreman out of the water. Foreman had a few long gains. I think what's going to happen is that Chuba Hubbard's probably going to get dropped. And then they got to face Denver, I think it is in week 12. Then they go on their bye in week 13. So you got a guy who's got an ankle injury. Then towards the end of the year here, they've got to face a really tough run defense. They go on bye, but then they come out of the bye. Presumably, Chuba will be healthy at this point. And they are getting to face, double checking the schedule here, the Seattle Seahawks in week 14, which is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Final name that I'll give you, and someone that I was very high on, and this was largely influenced by Dwain and his research. James Cook, Buffalo Bills. The Bills play the New York Jets in week 14. The Jets defense, they've got some strong parts to it, but hey, we know right now that James Cook is playing ahead of Zach Moss. In the event that something happens to Devin Singletary, Cook would likely be the leader. So these are all, not handcuff guys, but guys that you might be able to stash and use it in an emergency situation during that week 13 or 14 crunch time split.
It's funny you mentioned Raheem Mostert. He actually is one of the guys I have down on my trade for list. And it's not really for the playoffs. He's not a guy to me that's going to win you your fantasy league, but I think he's a guy that can help you get there. He owns this entire backfield. They do have a week 11 bye, but per PFF's strength of schedule metric, they have the number one easiest schedule for the rest of the season for running backs. Now, my hatred for Chase Edmonds starts and ends on Monday night when he cost me $500 on an underdog parlay that I hit 4 legs of. All that son of a bitch had to do was catch literally like 13 yards worth of passes, and I would have won $500. Again, if you want to bet on underdog, just like I do, use promo code HUSTLE. We'll match your first time deposit up to $100. So that's where I'm kind of down on Chase Edmonds. But I still think, even though Raheem Mostert's putting up some good weeks, I still think you can kind of buy him low just for a guy. If you're going to get to the playoffs, he's not going to be your RB1, but maybe he can be a flex. He can fill in, be an RB2. Like they're giving him a good workload. I'm kind of, it's going to let me down. He's going to end up screwing me. And then Myles Gaskin is going to be the guy that we're starting in week 16, but that's fantasy for you.
I mean, it might not. Raheem Mostert, maybe he holds up. This is why we explore so many options, though, because this game has such a wide range of potential outcomes that we just want to place bets on guys. And I think for the reasons that I outlined, the knee, the age, that's sort of like a looming buy for Raheem Mostert, where he has these negatives that we're all aware of. And yeah, to your point, he might be able to be acquired via trade at a significantly reduced value in relation to how it is he's performing fantasy-wise.
Our guest is Nic Bodiford. Follow him on Twitter at Nic Bodiford NFL. Let me throw another one of guys at you at the running back position I'm looking to sell. And this may sound crazy because of the week he just had, but how about Gus Edwards? I actually traded Gus Edwards in my home league this weekend. The deal was I gave away Damian Harris and Gus Edwards as a tandem to bring back Deontay Johnson and Rachaad White. My thought process there is Deontay Johnson is, in theory, a good player, even though his offense is terrible. But I really do love the upside of Rachaad White. We've already started to hear these rumblings in Tampa of maybe we're going to try to play the younger guys a little bit. And if anything happened to Lenny, you got yourself a league winner. But anyways, back to Gus Edwards. I heard my pals over on the Fantasy Points Waiver podcast, Joe Dolan, was talking about Gus Edwards, and Tom Brawley, the grinder, brought up a great point. In games that Lamar Jackson started and completed, this was his lowest passing attempts, I believe, in his career. So it was this anomaly game where Lamar doesn't throw. He doesn't really run either. He doesn't get into the end zone. Gus Edwards finds the end zone twice on 38% of the snaps. But he's a guy, he's literally a 0 in the pass game. I'm telling people, go out, sell now. You've got a running back you picked up for nothing who just finished in a top 10 in PPR. Like, see what you can get for him. What, you'd be crazy not to, right?
Yeah. No, and the theme of that trade, and you kind of touched on this, is basically trading away guys who aren't pass catchers for pass catchers. And that's where Rachaad White's ceiling is. I mean, that guy can be healthy version of, or spry version of Leonard Fournette.
in the chat here, and we love all the folks that follow us on YouTube. Make sure you're going over to YouTube, search Fantasy Football Hustle, subscribe, like the video, comment, all the bells and whistles. You guys know what to do. Take 5 minutes away from Pornhub, go to YouTube, subscribe to the Hustle. Alex wants to know, what about if you lost Breece Hall? And there's a lot of folks who are scouring the waiver wire this week trying to fill in a back, Nick, because they just lost Breece Hall. I don't necessarily think James Robinson is that guy. I kind of dig Michael Carter more in that situation, but I think right now, even with Vera Tucker, their guard just went down for the year too. It's kind of a situation to avoid if I can, because I just don't think the Jets are very good, and I don't dig the quarterback at all.
Yeah. Okay. So if you can get Michael Carter, then I would be happy to have him on pure volume, and he's a proven pass catcher. To your point about James Robinson, though, we are in complete lockstep. I don't want anything to do with him. I don't bet on running backs who are coming off Achilles tears. I'm kind of scouring the list right now. Were there names that maybe one of the Kansas City backs who's on bye, you might be able to sneak one of those guys away from his or her manager?
Yeah, let's pivot over to this Isaiah Pacheco story. So it kind of ties into what happened last week. And on the Sirius show, I led with this. There's Rap Sheet, who I don't believe anything he says at all, comes out and says, Isaiah Pacheco is going to be the starter. He's going to be, the focus of his offense now, and blah, blah, blah. He had the opening carry of the game, and they set his ass back on the bench. And then in the second half, what happens? He gets the opening kickoff. They sit his ass down, and CEH goes and scored. I'm not saying CEH is great, right? The usage for all these guys is terrible. But I just don't believe this narrative that one day Isaiah Pacheco is just going to become Jamal Charles in this backfield. He doesn't play on third down. He doesn't play in any real passing situation. That's Jerick McKinnon and a little bit of CEH. But, what are we looking for here? Do you want him to be like your in between the 20s guy? They get to the goal line and they do shovel passes to third string tight ends half the time.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. All of those are fair points. I think the upside with Pacheco is just the offense. And if one of these guys were to miss time, Jerick McKinnon's not young. He had a pretty serious knee injury when he was young. CEH, appears to be on the outs. Pacheco would not be someone that you can add and expect a week 9 start. That's all very fair.
Let me run through some of the teams here. So this is rest of season PFF strength of schedule. Here's the names in the top 10 for running back. Miami, number 1. Then the Commanders. I don't know if you want anything to do with them. Dallas, Buffalo, and Carolina, the Giants, Atlanta, Chicago, Philly, and Tennessee. Before we get to the bottom half of that, does anything there really stick out? A player from any of those teams for the rest of the season you might want to acquire? The name that's going to stick out here to me is Cordarrelle Patterson on the Falcons, because he's still hurt for a week or two. Algier and Huntley and whatever other guy that was working at Burger King that's carrying for him now. Cordarrelle Patterson is the guy in this backfield, and he's been down for a while. And if you can still pick him up, and they've got that week 14 bye, which isn't great, but I think you can get a significant discount right now on Patterson from somebody who might be in bye week hell, or they definitely need a W this week.
So I think that this is, my mind went to the same place, but it went to Tyler Algier. And that's really? Just because, yeah, but would I prefer Cordarrelle Patterson? Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if you're going to be able to pry him away. What I've liked about Algier's usage is, although he's barely been able to earn targets, he may have one during Patterson's injured reserve stretch, he is the guy who is running routes. Caleb Huntley is he hasn't done much in the NFL, but I think he's been in the NFL for a little bit. I think he's kind of just a between the tackles kind of grinder. Algier, at least his snap deployment has dual threat potential, if only on a team that passes the ball 13 times. If someone right now is willing to trade away Cordarrelle Patterson, I absolutely would do that. Absolutely would go get him.
I'm reading Dwayne's utilization report right here to see what he says about some of these players, and definitely, go over to PFF, go over to Fantasy Life, support Dwain, and read the utilization report. Tweet at him, say hello, tell him you miss him on the hustle, tell him to get his ass back here on a Tuesday night or something. We'll get him back here, folks. Don't worry. We'll figure things out and open the schedule up. But he's got on his utilization report, Tyler Algier this past week, 62% of the rush attempts, and he ran 38% of Marcus Mariota's. I mean, what did he throw? 13 passes this week?
Yeah.
So I want to avoid teams like that. Like, that's just such a low octane offense. And it's going to lead me to, let's jump over to tight end quickly from the running back. And because Kyle Pitts is a name that everybody in fantasy is talking about. And we're talking Falcons here. So Kyle Pitts, people say, do we add him? Do we drop him? Do we hold him? Do we trade for him? This is a team that was down by 21 points early in the second quarter. They threw the ball 13 freaking times, Nick. They don't want to throw the football. I don't care how great of an athlete Drake London is, how great Kyle Pitts is. If the play caller doesn't want to throw the football to them, he can't do anything with 13 passing attempts in a game. There's nothing he could do.
No, and it's a tragedy among tight ends with 100 offensive snaps and 30 targets. His 26.1 targets per out run rate are number 2 in the NFL among NFL tight ends. Is 1.55 yards per out run, or number 9. This guy is he's an efficiency machine, both from a yardage standpoint and an ability to earn targets. Every time he's out there, he's commanding the looks, but philosophically, they just aren't. They're not, man. It's the same story with Drake London, but they're not facilitating a 21st century NFL passing attack. And so, yeah, for that reason, I hear what you're saying. I think you might be able to drop him. It's really hard for me to accept, but I think that you might be right.
It's the same story that we told last year with Allen Robinson. When people took Allen Robinson in the 3rd, 4th round, and then he just did nothing. And the story starts, coming out. Do we drop Allen Robinson? The drum beat gets a little louder. Finally, in week 11, people are like, you know what? Screw it. I'm dropping Allen Robinson. But in the meantime, you're picking up players, maybe like a Kyron Williams. You miss picking up Jameson Williams. You miss picking up, a tight end, Greg Dulcich or somebody like that, where, take the name off the back of the jersey. Just look at this offense. Why would somebody want someone in the Atlanta Falcons offense in terms of about pass catcher? They just want to run the rock, but hey, it is what it is. And also talking about tight end, I have a sell here, and it's going to, it breaks my heart a little bit, but how about Dallas Goedert as a sell? Not because he's bad, but I would say, look, the Eagles are 32nd in PFF's strength of schedule metric for tight ends for the playoff weeks. Okay. Dallas Goedert is an easy sell. He's passed his bye. He's got 20% of the team's targets. He's got 3 top 10s in his last 4 games, 17% yards or targets per route run. The reason I say you could trade Dallas Goedert is he's not exactly setting the world on fire. You can find a Cade Otton. You can find a Juwan Johnson. You can find a Greg Dulcich. I mean, are they great? No, but I mean, it's not like you're getting Travis Kelce numbers from Dallas Goedert either. He's fine. He's serviceable, but this is a team too that spreads the ball around a lot. They like to run the ball. It's not like he's a big red zone monster. I think right now is a great time to sell and use that, hey, bye weeks in the rearview mirror argument for Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. He's not someone that I had really considered. But you make a compelling case. I have a buy here at tight end, and you mentioned him already. Greg Dulcich. He's rostered in 13% of Yahoo leagues and 7.8% of ESPN leagues. In only his 2nd week active off of the injured reserve hamstring stint, Dulcich just sent Albert Okwuegbunam to the bench. Mm-hmm. Alberto was not even active in week 7 last week. Over the last 2 games, Greg Dulcich is the fantasy tight end 7 in full PPR scoring. The guy can play, and I know his first touchdown was a little bit fluky, but we're looking for guys who have usage and who respond well to the usage, and he's doing both. And he's very likely to be available in everybody's league. So yeah, in this instance, what might be interesting is we've got the waiver wire coming up here. If someone could add Dulcich, and then trade away Goddard for a strength at another position, that would be a good way to maximize the value that Goddard, at least nominally, has right now.
Yeah, and again, back to Dwayne's utilization report, Dulcich, 81% of the snaps 2 weeks ago. 81% of the routes participated in. 72% this past week. This week, 26% targets per route run. That's the same number as Jerry Jeudy. That was better than Cortland Sutton in week 7. So, again, he's playing with Brett freaking Rippin out there right now. Russell Wilson will come back. Is that an upgrade? I don't know at this point. Maybe not.
Yeah, don't know.
It's a bad team. I get it. And I always say get away from bad offenses, but I can't quit a guy with hair that good. Like Greg Dulcich, he looks just like Yanni on steroids running around, and I can't get past that. But like I said, this is an opportunity to maybe sell from a strength with a Goddard or a Higbee or one of these players. Nick, I tell you, I've got a league where I've got Dulcich, I've got Higbee, Goddard, and I've got K. Dotton. I can't sell any of these guys for whatever reason. And we always say tight end's a wasteland. Everyone's looking for a tight end. Multiple leagues, nobody wants Greg Dulcich for some reason. I think the casual fan, not people that listen to the Hustle or subscribe to PFF or anything else, I think they're a little slow off the mark. They look at some of these and they need to see it like multiple times and go like, oh yeah, this guy's a superstar. They have no idea. They think he's just some random white guy who's out there, catching fluke passes.
Yeah, I tried to trade Deion Jackson off of his first game when he was starting for the Colts, or with the Nyheim Hines got concussed on the first play, and after that, I put him on a sleeper league, actually in an industry league, and the response I got was who? And he scored. He put up double-digit PPR points. Yeah, sometimes folks are quick off or slow off the draw.
All right, let's move over to wide receiver and talk about some players here. Again, per the PFF strength of schedule, the best wide receiver schedules for the playoffs coming up: Falcons, who cares? Pittsburgh, interesting. Remember, I just traded for Deontay Johnson. George Pickens could be out there. Tampa Bay, I think there's never been a better time to buy low on Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Buffalo, Cleveland, I got a guy I'll talk about there in a minute. Houston, Philly, the Jets, forget about it. Indy, and then Detroit. That rounds out the top 10. From that top 10 list, Nick, anyone you're looking to maybe buy going forward for the playoffs at wide receiver?
My heart fluttered a little bit with the idea that Drake London might make a resurgence, but I'm curious to hear where you're going. Was it the Cleveland Browns that you were kind of getting excited about? Because I'm wondering.
And it was Amari Cooper.
Okay.
Because if you look at Amari Cooper, he's a talented player on a team that obviously needs an alpha, and really he's that guy. You look at, he ran 100% of the routes last week. Okay. And is he setting the world on fire? Nah, it's not crazy. He was wide receiver 39 this week, but he's going to get Deshaun Watson back. He's still going to be out there dominating targets for this team. They're going to be more competitive, I think, with Watson. Might lead him to be a little farther down the field. He's a guy that whoever owns him didn't pay a premium for him. They're not counting on him to be one of their top 2 or 3 wide receivers, most likely right now. So you can get him maybe as a throw-in or for a lower-end player, and use the buys to your advantage. Go and say, hey, listen, you need X, Y, and Z. Maybe you need a tight end this week. Hey, throw in Amari Cooper, bring him back my way. He's just somebody that is too talented to not go out and try to acquire when he's going to be getting such a massive upgrade at quarterback soon.
I totally agree. And he was a miss for me. I was not interested in Amari Cooper during the draft season, and he's made me pay. And he might be a guy. Amari Cooper has burned a lot of folks over the last few years, and it would not surprise me if someone who has him right now is a little leery as to whether or not he can keep his production going.
And you got to think too, David Njoku just got hurt. He's got the high ankle sprain. Anytime I hear high ankle, head for the hills. He'll be back 2 to 5 weeks. Bet on the 5. maybe longer. Those things never heal. I have Dr. Jesse Morse on with me every Sunday on the Sirius show, 7 to 9 Eastern. And whenever we hear high ankle, it's like, forget him. Trade that guy. Go look to him next year. So Harrison Bryant, by the way, is the next in line there. But I think it's just going to open up more opportunity for Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, probably on a lot of people's waiver wire watch list this week. He's been pretty solid the last few weeks, top 25 finish in PPR this past week. At wide receiver, maybe who are you looking to trade for?
Well, so actually staying with the Browns really quickly, David Bell is a very interesting guy. He was a very productive college receiver. He's a rookie right now.
I beat the drum for him if you listen to our college preview show, because he was so good in the Big Ten, but go on.
Yeah. So with David Njoku out, the problem with these high ankle sprains, one, the guy's going to miss a long time. Two, it takes a very, very long, it takes an off season to rehabilitate a high ankle sprain. I'm not an NFL athlete. I had to rehabilitate my high ankle sprain like 4 years after it happened, though. It's an injury that is just nasty to deal with. This offense is going to need someone to operate in that short to intermediate area of the field. And the guy who is the starting slot receiver, i.e. David Bell, has a very good chance to do that. And with Watson coming back in week 13, I wouldn't be surprised if suddenly David Bell, you start hearing his name in like offensive rookie of the year conversations, because these rookies, sometimes they break out early and it's an amazing story, but sometimes it takes till the end of the season. And he's a candidate to me that we want to be adding to the end of our benches.
At the bottom end of our PFF playoff strength of schedule metric, the Saints, the Rams, Arizona, Jacksonville, and Seattle. Well, and then the 27th overall. I mean, there's a lot of good teams here. So I'm not really buying into this. I'm not looking to trade away Cincinnati receivers, Miami receivers. In fact, I'd almost be looking to buy T. Higgins. So he's got 3 weeks, outside of the PPR top 20, but he's been nursing a little bit of an injury. He's got a week 10 bye. What I like is a potential shootout coming up with Kansas City, and he's also got Buffalo in the fantasy championship game, which could just be an absolute print fest for DFS players. And right now people might be looking at T. Higgins and like, oh, Jamar Chase, he's the guy. Jamar Chase is killing it, wide receiver 1 weeks. But don't forget about T. Higgins. As Dwayne's talked T. Higgins up for years on this show. Like, if you can buy at a slight discount on T. Higgins, we know how much Cincinnati right now is playing out of the shotgun. They're throwing the ball left and right. They've kind of changed their identity over the last 3-4 weeks. Like, if T. Higgins is out there, someone's not happy with him, I would be pouncing on the opportunity to get him in my lineup.
Yeah, he logged a pair of full participant designations last week, which I think was the first time he'd done that in 2 or 3 weeks. So I won't be surprised if suddenly he kind of reasserts himself as a target hog in the offense.
Now, the worst team in this list, Nick, is the New Orleans Saints. So they're without Landry, they're without Michael Thomas. I'm kind of still feeling Chris Olave, though. I mean, you look at this target share. All but week 1, he's got over 25% targets. I mean, he's a kid who just gets it. He wins, and he's a big play waiting to happen. You put him in your lineup, any catch he makes could be 15-point swing your way. So I love to try to get Chris Olave on my roster going forward.
Yeah, I would too. I think he's going to be awfully hard to get. If you can, he is a guy who I would buy high on. And maybe what you do is you try to sell the individual who has him on the strength of schedule or whatever, put the fear in him. But right now, Olave, he looks like he's the number 1 rookie wide receiver, or number 1 guy in the 2022 class. He's sub 4.4 speed, and he is a complete route runner. He looks like what we were hoping Michael Thomas would be this year.
I got to ask you about another team in the bottom 5 of our playoff strength of schedule, and it's the Arizona Cardinals. DeAndre Hopkins returned this week, and he participated 92% of their routes. He saw 50% of the Cardinals' targets in week 7. Holy moly. Welcome back, DeAndre Hopkins. He's a guy I think you're still looking to acquire even after this big week 7.
Yeah. So I think that there's an interesting guy to compare him to, and that's DJ Moore. And I can kind of illustrate why I like Hopkins. So DJ Moore has got his bye in week 13, and as does DeAndre Hopkins. But I view these two guys very differently. DeAndre Hopkins is in a situation where his coach is very likely playing for his job. And I know Cliff Kingsbury was extended; he got the contract extension this offseason, but this start and Kyler Murray blown up at him on the sidelines, I think he's got to be on the hot seat, at least on a warm seat. If a team has to choose between a young, promising quarterback or head coach who's been up and down for a couple of years, they're going to stick with the quarterback. So for this reason, Cliff Kingsbury has kind of from time to time earned a sharp reputation, and he's basically done that by saying, "Hey, Kyler, just keep throwing the ball to DeAndre Hopkins." What I like about the teams that likely already have DeAndre Hopkins is that they have been stashing him to be a potential flex play. If you drafted DJ Moore, then you drafted him either in the second or third round, likely as your wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. I do like the fact that the team went straight to DJ Moore after the Christian McCaffrey trade. I think that's great, and I think that that's kind of what you sell high on, but you were very likely sitting at a mediocre record, whereas the team who didn't have to waste this pick on like a surefire top 24 wide receiver in DeAndre Hopkins, they probably had a decent, or I'm assuming they had a decent draft, but the fact of the matter is they didn't have to rely on him, and now they get this massive reinforcement in Hopkins. DJ Moore, look, PJ Walker, you did great last week, and I think that they can have another decent week this week, but the situation with Moore is that you need a sure thing at wide receiver 1 because you have to win the rest of the way. I think that the teams that have DeAndre Hopkins on them right now have a little more wiggle room than those that have DJ Moore. So DJ Moore is a sell for me. If you can go get DeAndre Hopkins, I totally do it, even though they have the same bye week, because DeAndre Hopkins has proven to command targets in this offense for quite some time, and DJ Moore is just last week had the best week that we've seen from him, not just this season but in a long time. Moore's targets per out run rate last week were 41.7%, by far and away the highest that he's had all year. His yards per out run rate were 2.88. That is over 1.5 yards per out run better than anything he's done the rest of this year. I think these are metrics that you can kind of sell someone on if you're trying to get rid of Moore. If you can acquire DeAndre Hopkins, I'd say do it, but I think it will be awfully hard because that person is probably sitting in a position of luxury.
All right, Nic Bodiford's been our guest this week. Let's hit some of these questions here in the YouTube chat. Again, folks, if you're watching on YouTube, we know you love the show. You're into the questions. You're into the content. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Like it, comment on the show, whatever you want to do. First question up here from Champ21, Nick. I've got Tyler Boyd. What do I do with him? I start him and he does. I bench him and he gets 21 points. So he's referencing, this past week where Tyler Boyd was PPR wide receiver number 2. But if you look at his weeks prior to that, wide receiver 32, 68, 51. So I get it. He's the third option on a team with some really, really good wide receivers. I mean, if it's full PPR, I think you start him as your third, fourth receiver, maybe a deep flex, but maybe this is the week coming off a massive showing. This is the week maybe you try to move Tyler Boyd. He's a better NFL player than he is a fantasy player.
Agreed. If you can sell him with, hey, check this out, he can do this on a weekly basis, I would totally do that. I also think that you might be able to alter your mindset a little bit here and just consider Boyd as sort of a stash play. A lot of people would be really excited to have Tyler Boyd in the event that their number 1 wide receiver, gets injured. So maybe you approach it that way. But the other one is, there's nothing wrong with just kind of getting your elbows dirty and studying which teams are bad against slot receivers and treating Boyd purely as a matchup play. And sometimes the process will be wrong there. You'll end up with a low probability outcome, but that, with these niche players, that is one way to approach these guys. But I got no problem with selling high.
I love that. That's such a great point. Something I say on this show all the time is you need to have playable depth. You never know when a DK Metcalf injury is going to happen. Somebody blows a hammy. Someone, they get suspended for PEDs for a couple. You don't know. Crazy stuff happens. It's the NFL, right? So having a guy like Tyler Boyd that you can plug into your lineup is awesome versus maybe on your benches like Garrett Wilson or Elijah Moore. And you're like, oh my God, this guy's going to goose egg me, or Romeo Dobbs, who is going to get dropped in 58 different leagues this week. Let's see here. Another question here. Who's the better pickup, Elijah Moore or Robbie Anderson? Now, Elijah Moore didn't play this week, is looking to get traded off the Jets. I doubt that happens. Robbie Anderson, he's getting a new look in Arizona. I mean, if it's between those, I'm saying Robbie Anderson for me.
I think that I would be buying on Elijah Moore. I like the talent more than I like Anderson's, and
no question about that.
Yeah. Corey Davis suffered an injury, and I'm actually going to look that up because I don't recall what it was, but knee injury. Okay, so Corey Davis, that's not great. So Corey Davis is supposed to be day-to-day with a knee injury. They just lost Breece Hall, who was one of their best short to intermediate area pass catchers on the team. It is possible that 1 week from now, New York is down two of their high snap volume pass catchers, and Elijah Moore is suddenly just being schemed the ball as the number 2 pass catcher in the offense. So Moore for me, based on talent and potential. Robbie Anderson he's in a really interesting situation. He's fairly volatile, but how are you approaching what draws your attention about Robbie Anderson?
I don't trust Zach Wilson at all. I mean, they're hiding him. And Jets fans always say, oh, you just like making fun of the Jets. No, the Jets have a really bright future. They've got incredible skill players. They got a little bad luck right now. That sucks, but it happens. That's what the NFL is. But I don't trust Zach Wilson at all. I mean, I could have Kyler Murray throwing the ball on a team that we know wants to throw and then throw some more, or we can have the Jets, who are basically a step above Atlanta in terms of their offensive philosophy.
Very fair. Someone in the comments here is saying MCL sprain for Corey Davis. That's manageable, but that's not good.
Nope, not at all. So yeah, way to monitor that. We got sharp people in the chat here. That's why you folks got to tune in every week. We do a couple of shows here on the Hustle. Got to make sure you're logging in. All right, another question here from our pal Timo. Excited about Dulcich? Kelsey's on a bye. Waivers are Dulcich, Juwan Johnson, who I started in the Kings Classic League, who I'm still in first place. Shout out Juwan Johnson for giving like 20 points. And Harrison Bryant. It's a deep league. He's got about $98 in fab here, Nick. There's nobody great on the waivers. Thinking of going over 20 on him. If you're going to go over $20 on Dulcich, I would hope or think at that point he needs to be a part of your lineup going forward. Because, other than that, I mean, if you're going to spend $20 on a 1 week rental, I mean, there's probably other guys who can get you semi-similar numbers, especially with Brett Rippon throwing the ball.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, not having $98 still in week 8, I get wanting to. I would understand spending $20. Harrison Bryant could just walk into a decent workload. Like that was he won the Mackey Award. The history of the tight ends who win the Mackey Award is very strong. So he is a guy, like I've been stashing Harrison Bryant in Dynasty for a long time now. I wouldn't be surprised if he responds well to the workload. An interesting note with Greg Dulcich, the Denver Broncos are going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who as a team have defended the tight end position really well. But I actually wrote this up at PFF last week. Linebacker Devin Lloyd is one of the worst coverage linebackers in the NFL. He's very likely to be the guy who is in primary coverage on Dulcich. So it wouldn't surprise me if Dulcich has, a killer outing this week. I'll probably be starting him here and there. I'll rank Dulcich inside my top 12. So if you want to do the 1 week rental thing, you probably don't want to, sunk cost fallacy. Maybe you want to make sure you keep him, maybe you don't, but maybe he's a guy you could sell high on. At the same time, I don't know, when we're entering this playoff crunch, having someone who's reliable behind Travis Kelce is not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I normally don't like having a backup tight end, backup quarterback. When you get to the playoff weeks, though, that's when it changes. And you should definitely have a good high-end backup. Like, some of these weeks where maybe a Kirk Cousins gets dropped when his team's on bye, or, just some of these kind of mediocre guys that, they're not setting the world on fire. That's when you pounce and you make sure you go, oh, okay, let me stash him and get him as my backup. Rob Fisher obviously listens to the show because he knows that I am the king of predicting NFL trades and player movement, as I have done several times in the past. Recommendations on stashes, players like Hunt, Cooks, Hamler. There's a lot of talk, Nick, about Kareem Hunt, and my Eagles have come up in that. Now, Kareem Hunt is on the final year of his deal. He doesn't make much money this season. And I'm no cap guy, but I believe if he goes somewhere, I think it'll probably bring back a compensatory pick to the Browns. So the Browns are going to say, well, you got to at least give us like a fourth or something like that for Kareem Hunt. The Eagles only have a fourth, and then they got a couple of sevenths. They don't have any fifths or sixths this coming draft. The following draft, I believe they got a couple of fourths. One might be conditional, but who cares? And they got a full lot. So if he's going to go to Philly, likely they would trade a future draft pick for 2024. I don't know if the Philadelphia Eagles need him. I'm trying to think what other teams could need a guy like Kareem Hunt right now.
What I should have been doing while you were going through that is looking this up. We just had a list of teams that tried to trade for Christian McCaffrey.
Mm-hmm.
The Buffalo Bills, they kind of poked around.
I would love Kareem Hunt on the Bills.
Yeah, right. He'd probably be a top 5 guy. I think that the Eagles, I think that they were involved as well.
I mean, that's just a home run right there if you're Buffalo, because as much as Devin Singletary is very serviceable, James Cook, okay, he's not any great shakes. He's okay. But, I mean, Kareem Hunt comes in, and he's an impact player. He starts for them immediately.
The Los Angeles Rams also tried to trade for him, and that's a team that's got a proven record of giving up draft capital to get a veteran, a good veteran. He would, were he to land in Los Angeles, he would just explode. I mean, that offense, it's not super high quality. It's not up to the standard that it has been, but that's a situation there where like he would just kick the rest of the guys to the curb.
Yeah, another one of our listeners here says Rams, Bills, Chiefs. That's a great spot. I mean, you got to bring him back. Remember, he was there for a while, and then he had his unfortunate situation with his girlfriend or whatever. And that's the NFL for you. People can do shitty things and still have a job, but we're just looking at the fantasy aspect of it here. Maybe they do bring Kareem Hunt back because I don't trust Pacheco. CEH is CEH. He's not winning you a championship, and they're in it, and they know they're likely going to have to go to Buffalo in January and win a game to go to the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. So you're gonna need somebody that you can grind with. Maybe that's why they keep talking. Oh, we're gonna grind Pacheco, and you want to keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands. And have somebody that can run the rock. And I live in upstate New York. The weather in January ain't great. So we'll see. That's kind of interesting. Let me ask you this too. A couple of guys on the stash front. Jameson Williams, 12th overall pick of the Detroit Lions out of Alabama. We could see him get ramped up, but when I read a couple of guys who write for the Detroit newspapers, they were saying initially it was Thanksgiving-ish, and I'm like, I can't hold on to a guy for another, 3 weeks, clogging up a roster spot if I don't have an IR. What do you think about a guy like Kieran Williams, a guy like Jameson Williams?
So Jameson Williams, he has the like tantalizing upside. I
Yeah.
think Kyron Williams is a situational potential success. I'd really prefer to bank on the explosive rookie wide receiver. I guess I'd say that just comes down to the like a given team's situation. If you're strong at running back, then you go with Jameson Williams. If you need a running back, then I think you go ahead and add Kyron. Everything that I've heard, especially from like Jordan Rodrigue, is that the team really likes him and that he's expected to have at least a big role within the backfield. But I don't know if that's actually going to end up being a large role overall. It's kind of a tricky situation.
Yeah, it's tough. Hey, our pal Shirley's in the chat here. Says, sounds as if Kyron is 4 weeks away. I mean, I was listening to guys today, and they made it sound like he could start practicing this week. So, I mean, you just don't know with these guys. It's all over the board. Our pal Brett Baumgartner asks, hi, Brian and Nick. Glad you're doing well. Would you trade Wan'Dale Robinson, the new Giants #1 receiver, to acquire Kareem Hunt in full PPR? So, again, I wonder what your other running backs look like. But, I mean, you were not counting on Wan'Dale Robinson at any point to be anything more than maybe a flex play. Kareem Hunt, if you make that trade, Nick, you're assuming he's going to get traded somewhere and become the guy. Because if you're in a full PPR, Wan'Dale Robinson's probably pretty lucrative for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I just wrote up Wan'Dale Robinson. I think that's an excellent trade to be considering, and it shows where Wan'Dale Robinson's value already is. He has been a target hog. So he's played in a total of 3 games. The first one was pretty short-lived because he suffered the knee injury. But in his 3 NFL games, 25% targets per route run rate, 36.4% targets per out run rate, and 27.6% targets per out run rate. Those are all typically team leading numbers. His yardage efficiency 1.25, 3.36, and 1.72 yards per out run. I think that I would probably land on the side of Wan'Dale Robinson over Kareem Hunt. Hunt could shoot through the roof when Deshaun Watson comes back, but I think whatever you're looking at right now, if someone is asking you, hey, I'd like to get Wan'Dale Robinson from you, I would wait until after week 8 because the New York Giants are playing the Seattle Seahawks, who are one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And then the Giants go on bye in week 9. So if you were determined to sell high on him, do it after he blows up this week. And then, kiss him goodbye right before the bye week in week 9. But on the year, I would be really excited about having Wan'Dale Robinson.
Good stuff right there. Let's see. Anything else? There's somebody asking, should I trade Jalen Hurts for Josh Allen? Yes. And I'm an Eagles. I have an Eagles neon over my shoulder right here. But yeah, if you can get Josh Allen, pick up Josh Allen. What else do we got here? Drake, do you do a start sit stream? I gotta ask you this, Nick. I've seen guys Friday night, Saturday night, and I'm a guy that likes to drink beer. As you notice, I drink beer during the show. These Friday, Saturday streams get insane viewership. It's crazy. I saw one guy, I've never heard of him in my life, and I'm pretty plugged into the fantasy community. Never heard of this kid. Again, doesn't mean he's good, bad, or indifferent. I just never heard of him. He was charging money on YouTube. You had to tip him to get a start sit question answered. I couldn't believe it. You talk about hustling. This kid is really a fantasy football hustler. Holy smoke. So good for him. I'm like, that you could just sit here on a Friday or Saturday night at 10 o'clock, throw the stream on, drink a 6-pack, and just have, your PFF rankings pulled up and just shoot the breeze. People love it. If you guys love it out there and you'd be into something like that, I'm sure I could find a friend to come sit here and have a cocktail with me and answer questions. So, leave us a comment on the YouTube page here. Hit me up at Drake Fantasy and let me know. Cause once the kids go to bed, I'm just sitting here watching, Netflix. So I could come on here and hang out.
And so I'll plug this. I do a Sunday morning start and sit show. And so if anybody wants to just send me money for that, I'm happy to accept it.
Yeah, really. It's crazy. If you guys are looking to bet and you think you know which player is going to score more fantasy points in a given week, download the Top Prop Fantasy app. I love working with these guys. I'm killing it over here on this site. I'm not even bullshitting you guys. All you got to do, look at the two players that they're giving you on a card. Let's say it's Patrick Mahomes against Jalen Hurts. You swipe right, swipe left. Which guy you think is going to score more points that week? Boom, you're winning money. It's the funnest, easiest place to go bet props. Go to Top Prop Fantasy, download the app, use my promo code Drake, and I will match your first-time deposit up to $50. Again, Top Prop Fantasy, download the app, promo code Drake, get free $50 from your boy here. All right. Lastly, my boy, Corey Richmond, would you trade for Njoku? No, I'm not trading for a guy with a bad ankle right now.
Agreed. Yeah. High ankle sprain. He might come back this season, but it's going to be a problem all year.
So, all right. Well, Nick, thanks so much. We want to keep this to just about an hour. Nic Bodiford, 33rd team, 4 for 4, PFF at Nic Bodiford NFL. Amazing job in your hustle debut here, my friend. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, Drake. I really appreciate it.
And the rest of you folks, if you got more questions, at FF Hustle, at Drake Fantasy, maybe you can tip us on there. We'll give you an answer. I mean, it's ludicrous. Anyways, folks, enjoy week 8. Check me out Sunday nights, 7 to 9 on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. And until then, remember to never get out hustled.